Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Lung Pa has been talking a lot the past week or so, giving instruction from the Anapanasati Sutta, first with the day long at Spirit Rock and continuing with last Sunday's reflections, teachings. It's a great theme, forms the heart of much of our practice, particularly as it dovetails with the Satipatthana Sutta, the mindfulness instructions, which form the heart of a lot of our practice in meditation, contemplation. So I thought I'd just offer a few personal reflections, thoughts of how I use some of that in daily practice, the meditation practice, particularly related to mindfulness of the body, favorite theme of mine. I put a lot of emphasis on mindfulness immersed in the body in our tradition, the Thai forest tradition. The Buddha really emphasizes it quite emphatically, quite strongly in the teachings over and over again in different suttas, different references to the four foundations of mindfulness, and in particular mindfulness immersed in the body, and goes to the extent of actually saying that without practicing mindfulness of the body, one can't expect to experience the deathless. So, in many different ways, it's brought up and held up as one of the most important contemplations that we can do. It serves a number of purposes of developing both tranquility, insight, as well as lessening the attraction towards sensuality, all of the defilements that arise in our minds and our hearts can be expressed through activities of the body. All the sense doors operate. The five senses anyway, the five bodily senses, sight, sounds, taste, tactile sensations, smells, body-oriented ways that the defilements go out to the world and seek objects for satisfying either the drives of craving, sensuality, the aversions that are conditioned in our minds, the confusion, all going out through the sense doors, through the body, trying to pull in objects to satisfy our perceived needs. So, mindfulness immersed in the body helps us to see how that process happens through the sense doors. with proper contemplation, using wisdom to drive our attention rather than defilements, we can also use the body in a very skillful way to become very peaceful, become very calm, settled through contemplation, and also develop insight into actually how these defilements have taken over and how to readjust to let them melt away and let the more wise elements of our psyche take over and steer us in a direction towards freedom, all through the use of the body as a tool for contemplation. In terms of a meditation experience, I've appreciated one of the ways that Ajahn Sucitto refers to the actual, it's not the end point, but certainly the experience we're looking for in meditation when we're contemplating the body. And that's to develop a sense of bodily presence. So we work with all the various objects and tools for body contemplation that were given in the teachings towards that purpose of developing a very sublime awareness of the presence of this body, just in and of itself. The teachings in the Satipatthana Sutta, the mindfulness of the four foundations of mindfulness, or the four establishments of mindfulness, refer to this kind of presence in different ways, I think. Kind of in the first section, in the introduction, before delving into the four establishments of mindfulness, the Buddha lists them out and talks about how we establish the four establishments of mindfulness with contemplation of the body as a body, contemplation of feelings as feelings, contemplation of the mind as the mind, contemplation of mind objects or dhammas, contemplation of dhammas as dhammas. Ajahn Jeff often translates it, refers to it as contemplating the body in and of itself, or feelings, mind objects in and of themselves, which points to this naturalness of contemplating without imputing any other concepts or ideas or opinions or views or judgments about these various contemplations, not trying to experience our idea or our values or our opinions of the body, but just to experience it just as it is. Same with all the other aspects, feeling and mind objects, just in and of themselves, just as they are, suspending judgments. In another place in the teaching on Satipatthana, he uses the different objects of meditation presented in the Satipatthana to help develop insight. So, as many of you are familiar, the instructions when they actually come, say in the contemplation of the body section, which is, by the way, the largest of the grouping, and a number of different objects for contemplation are brought up in that section. But as he presents the different tools for contemplation, the different objects for bringing into consideration, at the end of each one, he kind of switches tactics a little bit and says that one can use these objects to develop insight. So the way that this is called the refrain by some of the commentators, the refrain goes is in this way, a monk contemplates the body as the body internally and externally, contemplates the body in its arising or in its ceasing, or both, in its arising and ceasing. And then the part that really catches my attention is when he says, the bhikkhu is mindful that there is a body, just mindful that there is a body is experienced just to the extent necessary for bare knowledge. And I've always appreciated that. In some ways it sounds kind of simplistic, but it's really I think it's quite profound. It really points to this not self-nature of the body. There is a body. So it really dovetails, I think, with the initial instructions of to contemplate the body in and of itself, or the body as a body. And that the result of this insight, when these contemplations are taken up, is this experience of presence, bodily presence. Very simple, very straightforward, very uncomplicated. And the knowledge, the mindfulness, the awareness that there is a body. So how to get to that experience is another thing, the actual practice. And in that particular section, there's a number of different objects that the Buddha offers for contemplation. Of course, the mindfulness of in and out breathing, anapanasati, which is forms its or has its own presentation in the Anapanasati Sutta that Luang Por has been going through. And the various postures, contemplation of the four postures, sitting, lying, walking, standing, contemplation of clear awareness of movements and activities of the body, establishing clear, full awareness of everything that the body is doing as it's doing it. The contemplation of the four elements, and then the 32 parts of the body, and finally the charnel ground contemplations. So a multitude of different ways that one can contemplate the body, objects to use to contemplate the body, to establish this bodily presence in our awareness. And just to describe a couple of ways that I've used it over the years, particularly helpful to me. Everybody's going to have different ways, different things that speak to them in terms of these practices, but a couple of them have stuck out as particularly useful in my practice. And just remembering when I first came to the monastery as an anagarika, 21 years ago now, having practiced a fair amount of meditation as a layman, but not with a lot of instruction, mostly on my own, reading from books and talking with other people here and there, but not with a lot of detailed instruction. And up to, I think it was about 8 years or so that I was practicing in that way, and finally came to the monastery as an anagarika. And first winter retreat, sat down with Luang Por and describing the practices I've been doing. And many of you have heard this, but I think it's worth repeating that I really experienced at that point in my life a lot of frustration with the practice of breathing meditation as I had been doing it, as I had picked up from various sources, and had developed a real strong belief that, and was taught from various sources, that there was only one way to do anapanasati, and that was by very diligently focusing attention at the tip of the nose to watch the in and out breathing. Any other constant wavering attention of instruction. And finally, the feeling of not getting anywhere, movie or watch TV or go to the fridge or whatever, and just really not getting any of the promised benefits that it seemed like everybody else was so easily obtaining from what I was hearing and reading. And sat down with Luang Pa at the beginning of the winter retreat to kind of establish some sort of practice for the winter retreat. And knowing that he was also a practitioner of anapanasati, I thought that I would get some instruction with that, and was telling him about it. And to my surprise, his recommendation was to just stop doing it. That I had developed so many negative habits and views and experiences around anapana that it was just not worth pursuing. But I felt kind of a bit bereft because I didn't know that there was anything else that you could do. And was instructed, encouraged by Luang Pa to take up contemplation of the 32 parts of the body. As a sole practice, just drop the anapanasati, don't even go near it, don't try and develop it at this point, but just to really concentrate and develop the 32 parts, and to do it for a year without feeling like I had to work with anapana. So that turned out to be one of the most liberating bits of instruction that I ever had, and to this day still use the contemplation of the 32 parts to great benefit. I don't know if Paul still advises others to practice that much, but if not, then if you have any difficulty at all with the breathing training, then just really encourage picking up this contemplation. It's one that's heavily encouraged and widely taught in the Thai monasteries, I know, from having spent a little time there. So I use that quite a bit, and we recite it every now and then here, the 32 parts of the body chant. It's in our texts. I memorized that very first winter in Pali and English, memorized the 32 parts, and just gradually not only memorized the words, but developed tried to really develop as much of a experience of them as I could, both in the tactile sensations associated with the 32 parts and also with the like a visualization, having a visual image of what they might be. So studying the different picture books that we had, anatomy books, having had some experience with that already as a nurse, I found that it was just incredibly calming, soothing, settling, and reassuring that there was a contemplation that I could do that would actually bring some peace of mind, and something that I could commit to, something that was quite doable, experienceable in a very tangible way. And just encourage people to use that as well, that just really focusing on these 32 parts, the hair of the head, hair of the body, the nails, the teeth, the skin. Just bringing those images up in the mind, really quieting the mind and allowing the mind, the attention to absorb, to reach out and pick up those objects one by one, using the Pali or the English or both, but really drawing it into a direct experience, not just a concept or a memorization of a chant, although that's where you have to start, but really drawing it into the realm of tactile and visual experiences, and see where that takes one, see where that takes you. I find that there's a certain pace of going through them that's very useful, not too fast, not too slow. In the beginning, maybe establishing a bit of, taking a bit of time with each one to develop a solid perception of each of those 32 parts, so that it isn't just words, but an actual, a solid visual and tactile perception. But if you go too slow, or at least when I go too slow, then sometimes I find the mind will start to proliferate or get lost a little bit or sidetracked in some opinion or some proliferation around a particular part of the body, and kind of takes away some of the impact of developing a sense of this whole body just as it is. So going through it at just the right pace can be very useful. So hair of the head, hard to feel, but most of them you can really develop a tactile familiarity with if you put your mind to it. Hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, where they are in the fingers and the toes, and the teeth, the hardness of when the upper teeth and the lower teeth touch each other. Visual image, are the teeth straight, are they crooked, are they pure white, or are they discolored, stained? Presence of the teeth. Skin, covering the whole body, its texture, its color, its temperature, sensations, dry, moist. And then to flesh, the muscles, the density of the flesh all throughout the body, from the tip of the head all the way down to the soles of the feet, the big muscles, the small muscles, flesh. Sinews, all the tendons and the ligaments and the different connective kinds of tissues there that hold the bones and the muscles together. Drawing a visual image from your knowledge of these things and actually feeling them. The bones are very tangible. We can feel the pressure of the sit bones on the cushion or the chair. We can feel where there's any contact. Can feel the skull and the neck bones, and the rib cage and the scapula, the collarbones, the spine, the vertebra, all of these keeping this flesh actually upright. Without the bones, there wouldn't be any structure, there wouldn't be anything to keep it all upright. The pelvis, the thighs, the kneecaps, very solid, very experienceable on a tactile level. The lower legs and the feet, the toes, just the bone structure. Can spend a bit more time with something that's so solid and easy to feel. Then moving to all the internal organs, the kidneys and the heart and the liver, the membranes, the spleen, the pink sponginess of the lungs, That's easy to feel because the lungs are always expanding and contracting. You get a visual image as well as a strong tactile image. Just really allowing the attention to settle with each of these objects in the body, just as they are. The intestines, large intestines and small intestines, soft, squishy, coated with mucus, filled with the stomach filled with undigested food, the intestines filled with excrement. These are all the solid parts of the body, and with appropriate contemplation, appropriate attention, can be felt very clearly, experienced very directly. All the liquids of the body, the water element, contemplating those one by one, the pitang, bile, semang, phlegm, pubo, pus, lohitang, blood, sedo, sweat, medo, fat, asu, tears, wasa, grease, kalo, spittle, sinkanika, mucus, lasika, oil of the joints, utang, urine, and lastly, matulungkan, the brain. Just drawing visual images, experiencing them as you can, one by one, over and over again, until you get a sense of bodily presence. And it's good to view them as a whole as well, once you've kind of dissected the body a bit, reviewed each one individually, brought them up for contemplation, experienced them as best you can visually and tactily, to draw it back together as a whole, this whole body, as the chant goes, from the soles of the feet up and down from the crown of the head, a sealed bag of skin. To experience it in its entirety, the whole body. This is the third instruction in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sabakaya, experiencing the whole body, breathing in, breathing out, experiencing the whole body. That helps develop any opinions that we usually impute onto the activeness of body, take hold of the body and use it for different purposes. Presence to be felt, to be known. The body in and of itself. And I found after that first year that it was just so much easier to just be with the body and not have to convince myself that it should be anything other than exactly what it is. Awareness, tactily, visually. The breath just would start to be flesh and blood much of our time. Our attention doesn't weigh just the very subtle pleasurable sensations of in and out breathing. It can feel the breathing throughout the whole body because you've established your sense of presence with it. Can feel the in and out breathing not just in the nostrils and in the abdomen or the lungs, but the breath energy as it courses through the entire body. So this is a way of establishing this very peaceful, sublime sense of bodily presence. It's a technique that I found very useful. Other people, I think, have had some good success using contemplation of the elements to really develop that mindfulness immersed in the body. Or the charnel ground contemplations are very useful too. One useful way of looking at how this process works, again, Ajahn Sucitto described it in this way that I found very useful, was that we're using the mental factor of attention as it's described through the particular objects, say the objects of the 32 parts, or the in and out breathing, or the elements, charnel ground contemplations. These are the objects that the attention, if wisely used, can be directed towards to experience and to essentially pull in these particular objects. So in a way, we're skillfully using wise attention to go out to these specific objects. And then pulling them into awareness, pulling them into the citta for the actual experience of what they're like. So he likens it to the fingers of the hand, relating that to the quality of manasikara, of attention, that go out to the object to bring in the object, and that the awareness, citta, is like the palm of the hand, so that the fingers bring the object in, the attention brings the object in, to hold in the palm of the hand, to hold in awareness, to consider, to ask the question, how is this? What is this like? To bring it to the level of experience. So that mindfulness is the link between the two of them. Mindfulness brings the objects of attention into the heart for reflection, for consideration, for getting a real feel of what they're like. And it's at this level, once the objects are brought into the heart, into the citta, that we can start to look at them in a very clear, peaceful way, to start gaining some insight into their true nature. It's at that point where we can really bring this contemplation of there is a body to more fruition. We're bringing it into a very depersonalized experiential level, so that we can really uncontrollability, in a sense. This we have such a sense sometimes of being able to control our body, of being the masters of it, to be able to influence it and experience it for what our defilements usually are trying to grab hold of it for pleasure. But we can see that the body is actually quite independent of much of our wishes and wants. When we can really sit very quietly with the bodily presence and see how the breathing happens just by itself, without our having to do anything or being able to control it. We can try and experiment with that even, and just try and stop the breathing for a minute. Make that strong intention to stop breathing. Can you do that? Maybe for a short period of time. Sometimes people are really strong. They can suppress the breathing so strongly that they pass out. But as soon as there's no conscious control, then the breathing starts automatically. The body has its own way with it, without any personal control. It's just the body doing what it does. And the same for the heart beating. Feel the heart beating, and you can just get a sense of how there's really no personal control over that. Or even more subtly, just the various ways the body moves. You make a determination to sit still. And even if the body can sit relatively still through that strong intention, just watching each little facial twitch, each adjustment, the body's always constantly moving, constantly adjusting to get a little bit more comfortable. And you can try and control that to some extent, but it eventually takes over on its own. It's beyond the range of personal control. So when the mind is quiet and you've done some body contemplation and you've settled with the breathing, allow that, bring that into the heart and just watch very closely with this notion of, am I in control of this? And as the mind is quiet and watching this, you get a real strong sense of this body is just doing what a body does. It's independent of any of my wishes, wants, desires. So it's a real good contemplation to use just to help depersonalize the way we hold the body, and can really lead to that sense of anatta, not self. The body is not self. That in itself is a very calming, soothing insight, and also reinforces the samatha aspect of body contemplation. The more we realize that the body is just the body, doing what the body does, the more our attention can settle and be with just the breathing, the very calming, soothing, cooling aspects of anapana, watching the breathing come in, the breathing go out. And it's in this way, really, that samatha and vipassana feed and support each other. The more insight we develop into the arising and ceasing nature of the body and the breathing, the depersonalization of it, the insight of that this body is not under personal control, then the mind just calms down and settles. It stops trying to have opinions and control over it. And the attention can just settle with the breathing. It doesn't have to go out and pin it down and try and hold on to it. It just naturally wants to be there with this very simple process of the body. And then in turn, the concentration, the stillness deepens to the point where we can start to absorb into it. We don't have to force ourselves to go through any particular stages of jhana. The body and the mind just want to meld with each other. And one can allow oneself just to enjoy the simplicity of being with the whole body breathing, to allow the attention really to just absorb deeply into that, each breath at a time, suffusing the whole body. The pleasure of the feeling of the breath suffusing the entire body. And then as that happens, we can also every now and then pick up the reflection of who's in control. Is there any control? Is there an entity that's in charge of this body? So going back and forth between the calming, the soothing, and then the reflecting. Back and forth. Establishing a sense of bodily presence. Just knowing and feeling this whole body being present. and reflecting that it's not self, the nature of of anatta. And finally, just taking it the further step in contemplation of following, reflecting on the Buddha's instructions with regard to all of the khandhas in relation to self. And he says, monks, whatever is not self, abandon it. The body is not self. Feelings are not self. Perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, they're not self. Abandon it. Whatever isn't yours, whatever is not yours, whatever can't be regarded as mine, abandon it. Let it go, relinquish it. Don't attach. So in this way, the contemplations that develop samatha, develop vipassana, particularly in relation to the body, we use to let go of the attachments, the clinging, the craving that we usually associate with the body and all of our experiences of what we would normally call who we are, the khandhas, the self. And in this way, there's peace and freedom. But in the Buddha's instructions, it really starts with and depends on this contemplation of the body and really using it, taking it to its fullest extent. So just a few reflections for this evening and how to maybe use some contemplation of the body, how I've used it in my monastic life, and really encouraging people just to enjoy the process and experiment with it and make it something that's very practical and very pertinent in daily contemplative practice. So I'll leave it there for this evening.